So, it's now officially been over a month since the leak about the supposed Halo CE remake, and the responses to that leak have been rather mixed, shall we say, and without any official word about it, at least yet, we're very much left in the dark as to what this game might entail in every regard. So, with that said, I thought today it was finally time to sit down and have a good old-fashioned honest chat about this remake, about everything from the story, to levels, to content, extra content, gameplay, who might be behind it, and so much more. Also, it's quite funny, since the Halo CE remake leaked, a remake of another one of my favourite games of all time, Dead Rising, was announced, and it looks really good, and also, by some insane stroke of luck, the Metal Gear Solid 3 remake actually looks amazing as well. Fingers crossed, I'm praying to the remake gods up there that the Halo 1 remake, if it's real, ends up being amazing as well to complete the trifecta. So, starting out, there are two major questions that we need to ask about this remake. Firstly, who the hell is actually making it? Because that original leak never mentioned 343 at all. So, is it 343 making it? Is it Certain Affinity? Is it id Software? We have no idea right now. And the second question is this just a Combat Evolved remake? Or, much like Resident Evil, is it going to go beyond Combat Evolved and end up being an entire trilogy remake? I mean, there have been rumours of the latter, and if that does end up happening, that means that somewhere down the line, Halo 3 Anniversary, words that I swear to God feel cursed to say, will eventually happen. Of course, if that is true, it's a leak, so don't put too much thought into it. However, there is one major point of contention that everyone is talking about regarding this remake that we need to touch on first, and that's the fact that 343 Industries will in some capacity be attached to this project. Now, with a remake, when you announce a remake, the level of the base level of skepticism among fans is always going to be a lot higher than if you announce like a new game, for example, because a remake is, as the name implies, a remake of a beloved game, but done so in an entirely different era. And this is the case with literally every remake, from Resident Evil to Dead Space to GTA and more. It doesn't matter how good or bad the end product ends up being, initial base skepticism is always higher. So, when you have a studio like 343 attached to a remake who, let's just say, don't exactly have the greatest 14-year track record, that already high base level of skepticism gets even higher. Now, in the long term, this could very much just not be a problem. If the game releases and it's a fantastic remake of Combat Evolved, then all the skepticism was entirely moot and meant nothing. But before that does or doesn't happen, there are gonna be so many more people just inherently against the idea of this remake solely because 343 are attached to it. And frankly, I don't really blame anyone in that headspace. I mean, how can you? In fact, this is the #1 reason for skepticism that I see. And unfortunately, the only way for that skepticism to be remedied is for the game to launch and be amazing. Up until that point, that skepticism is always going to be there, which sucks, but it is what it is. So, necessary Debbie Downer initial take out of the way, let's flip the tone and talk about something positive now, right? So, if the Halo CE remake is real and is the next Halo game, like I genuinely believe that it is and will be, that means that the next Halo game will have the following: The Covenant, The Flood, Sergeant Johnson.
Am I right, Marine?
Tons of marine combat, linear levels across a litany of biomes, the goddamn plasma rifle, and one other thing that I think I'm forgetting.
Run for your life! He's got the Halo 1 pistol!
Something also worth noting is that the remake isn't the only Halo game in development either. Of course, there's Halo 7, which is probably a much more long-term project at this point, and then also possibly Tatanka, although God knows what happened with that. I mean, if it turns out that Certain Affinity are the ones making this remake, then I think it's fair to say that Tatanka has been cancelled completely. But if it turns out that it's not Certain Affinity, I'd say that Tatanka is still probably on the board in some capacity. Okay then, let's move on now and talk about some more general things that this remake needs to do or have or be to be successful. And this first point that I'm going to make is hands down the most important point in this entire video. Nothing else comes close. And that's the fact that this remake of Halo CE needs to be additive and expansive and not alterative. You're gonna get sick of hearing me say that throughout this video, but it's very important because I still believe that the base existing Halo Combat Evolved is an absolutely near enough perfect experience. It doesn't need any unnecessary change purely for the sake of change or any redesigns for a modern audience. Instead, what a Halo Combat Evolved remake will massively benefit from is addition and expansion. Because it was the first game in the Halo series, so much has released since that expands the base Halo 1 experience, from books and graphic novels to shows, movies, and even entire games. But of course, for obvious reasons, when you go back and play Halo Combat Evolved, it's like none of that content exists. The best thing this remake could do is be Halo Combat Evolved the Definitive Edition. Tie in all of the successive lore and story to expand the Halo Combat Evolved that we all know and love without changing it in any major way. My biggest fear with this remake is them not doing that and instead just wasting all their time retelling Halo 1 in their own way, which likely won't be as good as the original. Additive and expansive, not alterative. Repeat after me and leave it in the comments. Additive and expansive, not alterative. Another thing that I think everyone is in agreement with is the fact that this game needs to be M for mature. We cannot have this T for teen rating anymore. If anything, I kind of want Halo CE Remake to be more gory than the original, and obviously a T for teen would not allow for that. I dread to think how much they'd have to butcher the Flood to make them fit within a T for teen rating in a first-person game. Please just go back to M for mature. Also, please, for the love of God, get Marcus Lato involved. It's a crying shame that he's not already involved in this project, of course, if it exists. Right now, he's a free agent, and he's also expressed interest in the project, but, I mean, above all else, it's Marcus Lato. The man is the godfather of the Master Chief, and he's one of the most important members of the original Bungie since Halo 1, and he's had his hand in pretty much everything from the art design to the story to the world building and so much more. There is not one person on planet Earth more qualified to be in a lead design role on this game than Marcus Lato. Having an OG help guide the remake of the game that he was pivotal in the design of is just a no-brainer. I mean, there's so much expertise and knowledge that Marcus will have about Halo 1 that nobody who didn't work on the original would have. To say that he's a valued asset would be, well, the understatement of the century. Hand this man a blank check already. On the topic of audio and sound, I have a few requests. Firstly, leave the soundtrack alone. Music does not need to be remastered and remade like textures or graphics do. Remaking soundtracks, I think personally, is entirely useless when you already have a perfect, unbeatable one that forms so much of the Halo 1 soul that's recorded and ready to use again. I see no reason to recreate it. Secondly, rehire every single voice actor. No cutting of characters, no recasts, nothing. Please do not pull a recasting Frank West, for the love of God. The OG voice actors, again, much like the music, form much of the soul and identity of Halo 1, and without them, a key part of the Halo 1 experience is just missing.
Okay, guys, I'm gonna try and sneak up behind the Flood. I'm coming in behind them now, so shush, just be quiet. I can't believe it. What the hell are these things? Crikey, look at them! I've never seen anything like this before. If I can just get a little bit closer, maybe I can just prod one and see what it does. I've got to be really quiet now, okay? They look pretty bloody dangerous. Oh, crikey! I've never seen things like this before.
Now, there is one small caveat with this. Of course, if an original voice actor isn't available anymore, then there's not really much 343 can do, so my opinion with that would be to just reuse the old voice lines, but that's a tough bridge that I hope they don't have to cross. And thirdly, people are going to say that I'm nitpicking with this, but frankly, I don't care because it means so much to me. Please reuse as many of the original Bungie era sound effects for everything from weapons to vehicles to enemies to HUD sounds and UI sounds and more as possible. Not entirely, but for the most part, Bungie reused many of the same sound effects for all of those things throughout all of their games, which gave every weapon and vehicle a solid audio identity. And then when 343 took over, they just changed every sound, and then their successive games, they changed the sound again, so they never even formed their own identity for the weapons. I do think that people don't talk about this as much as they should do, because whenever anyone does, someone just says that you're nitpicking, but audio that you're going to be hearing tens of thousands of times from weapons or vehicles or the UI or the HUD or enemies is crucially important in forming the identity of a game. It plays a massive role in it because of how much you're going to be hearing it, right? So I think Halo needs to go back to kind of re-establishing that audio identity that Bungie gave it, that 343 have kind of just not only not continued, but also haven't even formed one of their own. Okay, quick breather. If you're after a brand new PC to blast through Halo at beautiful frame rates and eye-watering resolutions, then look no further than my Flood-themed line of PCs made in partnership with Apex Gaming PCs. From the Pure Form to the Gravemind and the mega powerful Primordial build, we've got PC builds of all varying power and price range. Just head on over to the link in the description to pick one of these floody bad boys up today. So, moving on, let's talk about the story, which is probably going to be the biggest thing in this game for me, quite honestly. And overall, I see absolutely no reason to change the base story, at least majorly. Halo 1's story is, although very simple, an incredibly solid military sci-fi horror story, and it's an amazing introduction to Halo's universe. The only changes to the story, and change is a very loose term in this sense, are filling in narrative gaps, so for example explaining what happens between levels, and adding in new stories that are solely additive to the existing Halo 1 story. And thankfully, there are 1,000,001 ways that they could do that, especially with Halo 1. In fact, I think the potential of this happening is one of the greatest things that could come from this remake, and it's actually my main source of excitement for it. So the main one here is bringing book content to life in a game. This is something that people have wanted since like 2003, to be honest with you, and with how well connected Halo 1 is to so many different books and graphic novels and the like, it's the best place to start introducing book stories to games. Firstly, The Flood, which is Combat Evolved's official novelization and one of my favourite Halo books of all time, has so many side stories and characters in it that would be just amazing in either their own dedicated levels or mini-campaigns. There's the story of Zukazamami and Yayab, the elite and the grunt who stalked Chief throughout the entirety of Combat Evolved. The story of Marvin Mabuto, the Marine that Chief called a badass son of a bitch who was taken to the library before him and almost made it to the end all by himself. There's the horrifying tale of Private Wallace Jenkins and his agonizing, partially failed Flood infection. There are the side missions of the ODSTs that resulted in them destroying the Truth and Reconciliation to stop the Flood from taking it back to Earth. There's the Flood outbreak at Alpha Base, where they emerged from the vents and overran the UNSC's stronghold on the Ring, and so much more that I probably forgot. Secondly, there's First Strike, the book that picks up right at the end of Halo 1 and connects it, kind of, to Halo 2. In First Strike, you've got the various missions that Chief and Blue Team undergo, the raid and capture of the Ascendant Justice, their return to Reach, and the raid and the destruction of the Unyielding Hierophant. And thirdly, there's the graphic novel, which contains two of my absolute favourite Halo stories of all time that also connect to Combat Evolved that I would do literally anything to have turn into levels. Firstly, the Flood outbreak on the Infinite Succor, where Halfjaw commanded a squad of Spec Ops Covenant to go and quell the outbreak, in the process facing an infected prophet and fighting the infected Bero Kusavai, who was one of his closest friends and also the greatest elite swordsman to ever live. And then, of course, Breaking Quarantine, the badass story of how Johnson made it out of the Flood containment facility, killing off hordes of Flood all on his own. Then there's story beats from entirely different Halo games that connect to Halo 1 and that could be fleshed out a ton with levels or cutscenes or terminals and the like. The Heretics who the Arbiter sent to the gas mine. You could expand on what Halo 2 Anniversary's terminals already did with those and really give Caesar Refame a true origin story. There's literally anything relating to the Arbiter, because at this point I will do literally anything to get him back in a game. Of course, as Del Vadami, he was in command of the entire Covenant war effort on Alpha Halo and was present in orbit the entire time. There are a billion things that you could do with him. And then there's Fireteam Raven, which is slept on quite badly because it's an arcade game, but it's got a pretty cool story with ODSTs facing off against tons of Covenant, Flood Juggernauts, and loads of other stuff, which is ripe for expansion. Then there's like kind of miscellaneous external media that again would be absolutely amazing integrated into a game. There's the Mona Lisa, which of course is the main one. Everyone loves the Mona Lisa. And although this story doesn't take place during Combat Evolved, but right after it, the entire thing of course revolves around Oni taking Flood samples from Alpha Halo to experiment with. They're not exactly the most like closely connected, but Mona Lisa and a Halo 1 remake, I feel like there's something there. They could mash them together in some way to create something that people would love. And then there's also Halo Nightfall. Now, hear me out here. Nightfall was garbage. It was atrocious. In fact, I've got a video planned soon where I'm basically going to spend 25-30 minutes laughing at it. However, it did introduce something actually really cool. The Thano-Let-Golo, which were a very weird strain of the Let-Golo worms that the Foreigners specifically used against the Flood, which were harbored on Alpha Halo. I'd love for them to make a mini level or campaign or something where the Thano-Let-Golo are present, because credit where it's due, I will say, in that show or movie, they were pretty intimidating. And then there's also cut content as well. There was the cut prophet assassination mission where, as the name implies, you were going to go and assassinate a prophet in Halo CE. They could definitely find a way to bring that back. And then there's also a really cool early rendition of a sort of a control room where instead of it being in an icy canyon, it's in the side of a volcano. I'd love to have a non-Halo 5 volcano level in Halo at some point, so maybe there's a way they could bring that back as well. And of course, there are tons of brand new stories as well that they can make up to add on top of the existing Common Evolved story as well. The point I'm trying to make here is that Halo 1 is arguably the most external universe tied Halo game of them all. So there's so much potential for them to add on top of the existing Halo 1 story and flesh it out and make it even better than it already is without changing it. Something else that I want to see from the story that's kind of half story and half atmosphere is I'd love to see them, with the power of an Unreal Engine 5's graphics and lighting, go absolutely hardcore with the horror. Dial that horror dial up to 28, if you get me. So I don't know if it was because 28 Years Later is coming out next year and I'm starting to get really hyped for it, or because of the video that I filmed last year where I went through Alex Garland's Halo script where he basically rewrote Halo 1 in his style and he wrote the Flood very similar to like 28 Days rage-infected zombies. I don't know if it's all that coming together, but I would just love to see like a 28 Days style kind of erratic zombie horror take on the Flood, and Halo 1 could be a great place to do that. Maybe not in the main game, but say for example, if we did get a level about Marvin Mabuto, oh my god, that would be such a good place to do that. Have like real erratic zombie horror in like a really like, again, horror, I'm gonna say horror so many times, horror-based level where you're an unarmored, partially armored, unshielded Marine with very limited ammo, very limited movement, and like 1,000 combat forms to kill that are sprinting at you from the darkness at all angles. They could do that so well with that 28 Days. Oh man, that's a dream that will probably never happen, so I gotta start thinking about it, but the potential is there. Either way though, Alex Garland, Danny Boyle style 28 Days zombie horror or not, I just want this game to have even more horror. Halo has been missing horror now for, at least the main games have been missing horror for 17 years now. 17 painfully, excruciatingly long years. It is about damn time it gets it back. Oh, and one last thing about the story. I want to talk about the cutscenes real quick, because I've seen some people saying like, oh, I'd love to get blur cutscenes. And personally, I wouldn't, right? So I think with the graphical power of Unreal Engine 5, you don't really need blur cutscenes anymore. I would much rather have in-engine cutscenes like Halo 1, Halo 2, Halo 3, and Halo Infinite, where you can affect them with gameplay, where what weapon you're holding at the end of a level carries into the cutscene in Unreal Engine, as opposed to the more static pre-rendered cutscenes that Blur do. Blur cutscenes are great, don't get me wrong, but I just vastly prefer in-engine cutscenes, and I think with Unreal, there's not really going to be like that much of a graphical delta between gameplay and cutscenes anymore, so now is the time to do them for Halo 1. And finally, let's talk about the gameplay. There's a lot of stuff that I want to talk about regarding gameplay, but first off, we have to touch on the movement because it's a bit of a talking point. Personally, I want them to stick with classic Halo gameplay. If anything, what I want them to do with this remake is kind of tie Halo 1's gameplay in with the gameplay of the rest of the original trilogy. I want them to unify it because Halo 2 and Halo 3 feel mostly very similar. Halo 1, however, the core movement is very slidey and kind of unresponsive, and it's the one main sticking point that I have going back to it. So the only movement changes that I want in this game are for them to make jumping feel a bit more responsive and to make the movement feel a bit tighter. Other than that, leave it be. As soon as you completely overhaul the core movement, you then have to start rebalancing and redesigning everything from like levels and AI and vehicles and the way that weapons are balanced, and it opens up a massive can of worms. I just think the remake would be so much benefited by just being a much tighter feeling classic Halo experience. The same kind of mantra applies to the AI and the weapons as well. I don't want any of the existing ones to be completely modified or changed, however, adding new ones on top of that would be really good. Not one element of Halo 1's weapon, vehicle, or AI sandbox needs to be removed or reworked. Not only would that be massively unfaithful, it'd also just be entirely unnecessary. Honestly, if you ask me, in terms of like raw fun, Halo 1 is still the most rawly fun, if that makes any sense, Halo game. The way that all the weapons interact with the enemy sandbox and the vehicles, it just, even more so than like Halo 2 and Halo 3 for me, CE just hits. It's just perfect, and I don't think that that perfect balance needs to be shaken up by changing anything existing. However, I do think that new additions on top of that, much like the story, would be really good. And the best way to do that is cut content. Now, Halo 1 had so many weapons and vehicles and enemies and wildlife that were left on the cutting room floor that I would love to see this remake finally add in. Now, I've got a big video planned soon going into extreme detail about pretty much everything that was cut from Halo 1's campaign, very much like the Halo 2 cut campaign video that I've either already made or I'm releasing next. It depends how stuff lines up. I'm currently in the past right now, and unfortunately I don't have a time machine, so I can't jump forward and see if that video's been released yet. But either way, I'm going to save a lot of the Halo 1 cut content talk, of course, for the video that's dedicated to it. However, in this video, I want to just kind of briefly blitz through a bunch of stuff that was cut from Halo 1 that I would love to see return. So, here we go. The flamethrower, the chain gun, the bolt-action sniper rifle, the machete, the fuel rod gun, the energy shield, the gravity rifle, the Shadow, or as it's known now, the Spectre, boats, blind wolves, the Thorn Beast, the Drinol or Sharkoi, the Engineers, the Covenant Sniper, the Tank Beast, and so on. As I said, I will go into much more detail about all of this stuff and more in that video coming up soon, so if you haven't done so yet, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss that bad boy. But for now, let's continue. Now, in terms of additions to combat that came in subsequent Halo games, the only thing that I'd really want to see added is dual wielding. Now, I don't know about you, but I sorely miss dual wielding. It was one of those entirely optional kind of layers of depth that felt like the physical embodiment of Rule of Cool without, at least in campaign, damaging really anything. I honestly don't care about balancing concerns with dual wielding in a campaign. In a single player experience, stuff like that isn't as important as multiplayer, so I think honestly, you could just have both weapons be equally as powerful when they're dual-wielded. I just want to shoot two guns at the same time again, man. It's been so long. It's so badass. It's such a cool feature, and I miss it so bad. On that topic, vehicle boarding is something that, like, I don't really care either way. If they added it, fine. If they didn't, fine also. Although, kind of on that topic, one thing I absolutely do want them to add, that I think they will, is the ability to drive the Halo 1 Wraith. Now, the Halo 1 Wraith was always a little bit of a sticking point for me because I always loved how it sounded, and not being able to fire it for myself really sucked, but I think they will add that. And the final thing that I want to talk about regarding the gameplay part of the remake is this is a long shot, but I seriously hope that 343 or Certain Affinity or whoever the hell is making this take some inspiration from Ruby's Rebalanced campaign. Now, I have already made an entire video about Ruby's Halo 1 Rebalanced mods, but long story short, the mod is a masterpiece and Ruby's a genius. The way that he managed to make the environments of the levels come to life by having so many interactable elements that made the locations they're set in feel so much more real was just amazing. I mean, I said it in my video in his mod, go watch it if you haven't done already, but it felt like he kind of applied the classic zombies Easter egg design philosophy to Halo 1, and it's a weird combination that you would never put together, but it works like a goddamn charm. Having so many interactable elements built into the design and the aesthetic of the levels ramps the immersion up, and it makes you feel so much more connected to the world and story, and adds a ton of gameplay depth as well. It's a kind of style of design that morphs the story and the gameplay in a way that I don't think Halo has ever done. It connects the two in a way that is best described as the zombies Easter egg way, having you interact with the world as if it were an actual real place that you would interact with, but through gamified mechanics. Very hard to describe. Go and watch that video if you haven't done already, and also go play the mod. But long story short, I really hope they take some design inspiration from Ruby's mod for the way they design the levels and the way that they hopefully make them interactable, because goddamn, that mod is a masterpiece and deserves some AAA love. So, I think that just about rounds out all I want to talk about there. Leave your thoughts down below in the comments on how you're feeling about this remake right now. what your concerns are, what your hopes are, what you'd like to see from the remake and what you wouldn't like to see. Also, let me know your thoughts on all of my thoughts as well. Thoughts on thoughts on thoughts. It's late, I'm tired, I've not drunk enough water today, so I'm gonna round this video out there. I really hope you guys enjoyed. It was kind of nostalgic and nice to do a just general conversational video again like this. I feel like I've not done one of these in quite a while, and I kind of miss making them. So if you enjoyed this video, I will definitely make more if you show enough support down below in the comments. So with that said, I want to give a huge thank you to all of my amazing patrons for the continued support over there, as per usual. Thank you all so much. And thank you all so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. And I'll catch you all in the next